Welcome to Empowered by Iron, the podcast for female strength athletes by female strength athletes. We are your hosts, Kristin Lander from Fiercely Fueled Nutrition Coaching and Mary Morton from Silver Linings Podcast Productions. Together, we are Empowered by Iron. This week's episode is brought to you by Women's Strength Coalition. Women's Strength Coalition is a non-profit organization whose mission is to build stronger communities through increased access to strength training. They envision a world where everyone has equal opportunity to express their voice and embrace their power. If you haven't already checked them out, they have a wonderful blog where they interview some of the biggest female names in the fitness and strength world. They have some amazing events that they put on throughout the year. So if you haven't already, go check them out at womensstrengthcoalition.com, or you can find them in the show notes. We've linked their Instagram, Women's Strength Coalition, and womensstrengthcoalition.com. So check that out in the show notes. This episode is also brought to you by Fiercely Fueled Nutrition Coaching. The Fiercely Fueled method utilizes research-based facts and principles to create a custom nutrition program with the right amount of macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fats to reach your goals, keep you healthy, and increase your athletic performance. This company is none other than Kristin Landers, so if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know that this is Kristin's nutrition company. She's very well versed in the fitness and nutrition world. So if you're looking for a nutrition coach or someone just to help you out a little bit, just go ahead and reach out to her at fiercelyfueled.com, and you can contact her there. Also, if you haven't already, please go join our Facebook group page, Women in Strength Athlete Resource. We have some great conversations on there, and we'd love to hear from you. So join and introduce yourself. We'd love to hear all about you and your journey. And I think that is it this week for this, and we're going to get right into the episode all about mobility. Hope you guys enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome to Empowered by Iron. This week, our podcast is brought to you by Standing Desk and questions on mobility. So Kristin, we're talking about mobility today.
Yeah.
What is mobility? What are we talking about? Explain mobility to us.
Yeah, so before I do that, I'm going to talk about the fact that I think, even as a doctor of chiropractic, I think that mobility is super freaking confusing. So if you're confused by it, if you're confused by like everyone saying do this and do that and don't do this and do my way or do that way, there's good reason for you to be confused by it. So
usually the confusing part, I feel, comes from different companies saying, use my stuff.
Right.
My stuff works better, when in reality, they're not even breaking it down to the essentials, which is what we want to do for you guys, because we don't have any skin in the game in this.
Right. So let's talk about what mobility is.
What the fuck is mobility, Kristin?
Yeah. So mobility is defined as the ability to move or to be moved freely and easily, and then the strength to control those movements. So that's the definition of mobility.
So it's like not feeling limited in any movement or physically limited in any movement.
Exactly.
And having the strength to complete that movement.
Exactly. And
Cool.
So the reason that we need mobility is because without the proper joint and tissue mobility, we cannot hit the positions that we have to hit in our sports without using compensation of other muscles or joints to get there, which really sets us up for injury, or also, like, even worse, or maybe not worse, but definitely not good, is decreased performance just through decreased torque and power output. Like you can't utilize enough force because you're not getting in the right position.
Right. And your body doesn't know how to be in that position.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So mobility is very closely tied to stability. We need both.
They're not the same thing.
They are not the same thing.
Okay.
So,
Because I always thought that they were.
They're not. So mobility is the movement, right? The stability is defined as the ability to maintain or control joint movement or position. So the mobility is getting into that position, and then the stability is being able to be there safely under load, basically.
And to get out.
Yeah,
or is that a whole nother?
okay. Well, that's the
Otherwise we're
strength,
just
but yeah. So stability is achieved by basically the coordinating actions of surrounding tissues in the neuromuscular system. So we need stability for the exact same reason we need mobility, and that's that a lack of it in the proper places will cause a compensation and lead to injury. So think about, real quick, think about a snatch or an overhead squat.
Mm-hmm.
So that overhead position, right? A lot of times we can catch a weight overhead, but we can't stabilize it enough to stand up with it, and we miss the lift.
Right.
That's where stability comes in.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now that we have those definitions out of the way,
Mobility and stability.
yep, we're going to talk about the thing that leads everyone to start thinking about mobility. Usually people don't start thinking about mobility or stability until they're in pain.
Oh, not fun.
Right. So if you have pain someplace during a movement, let's take the squat, for example, because whether you're a power lifter or a weightlifter, we all
or even
squat.
a strong woman or bodybuilder, you probably do some sort of squat movement.
Right.
Every day. Well, not every day, but
maybe every day.
Maybe every day.
Mm-hmm. So if you have, say, for instance, low back pain with squatting, you need to look at the stability of that area and then the mobility of the joint or the area above and below. So in the case of the squat, you would need stability in the lumbopelvic region, which is
in your low back, pelvis.
Your low back and pelvis. You need stability there under load. And then you have to have the mobility of the hips. So the area below the lumbopelvic region is the hips, and the area above is the thoracic spine.
Okay.
Okay. So same goes for if you have pain in the knee with squatting. You need to look at the mobility above and below the knee, so the ankle and the hip.
Okay, so what you're telling me is when you have a problem area, let's say it's your squat, you have pain when you're squatting, specifically in your hips, you need to look above and below where your hips are?
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, so here's the thing that a lot of research has been done in the last 10 years or so, or I should say it's becoming more frequent that researchers are looking into this stuff, that the areas that we experience pain are oftentimes not the area of the problem. Which is one thing that drives me crazy, because I see this all the time in my practice, right? As a chiropractor, I have people that come to me with knee pain and they're like, well, I went to go see the orthopedist, and the orthopedist, they took an x-ray of my knee, or they did an MRI and they said nothing's wrong and no one can find anything and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, did anyone look at your hip or your ankle or your calf or your quad or your hamstring or any of that? Nope.
Oh, well, I know for me, like, I've dealt with knee problems for a very long time, and I realize I'm very young to have knee problems. But when I used to run, because I had disordered eating and I was running to keep my body weight down, I would go running when my knees were swollen and like they hurt. So now I have a lot of knee pain, and I know I have knee pain, and I know that it's not my knee. My knee's pretty fucked up, but like I can literally feel my quad sometimes pulling on my knee.
Yeah.
So that means it's kind of a weird mental shift. You have to be like, okay, yeah, your knee hurts, but you need to smash your quad, or you need to look at your calf.
Yes.
So,
and we're going to get into some of that really in depth coming up. So
broken knees?
Yes, broken knees.
Is that mobility or stability? Or is that fuckability?
All right, so let's go back to talking about mobility. Okay.
Which is the ability to get into a position.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Just to keep
the ability to freely move.
Freely move.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. I just want to make sure we're keeping these straight for me and for all of you listening, because it can be very confusing.
Yeah.
Okay. Continue.
So one super overlooked area of mobility is the thoracic spine. And so the thoracic spine is the portion of your body basically that has ribs, if you want to think of it that way. So it is the whole portion of your spine, your upper body that has ribs. So it's not the low back because we don't have ribs in our low back. And it's not the neck. We don't have ribs up in the neck. We have ribs basically shoulder to shoulder. Well, you actually can get ribs up in the neck. It's called a cervical rib, but we were not going to get into that because you guys don't care.
Fuck?
I know it causes a lot of problems. Anyhow.
Really? A rib in your neck?
It's not actually that obvious. Like you would only know if you saw it on X-ray. You wouldn't see like a rib sticking out.
Sticking out.
It's like Flintstones.
Oh my god. Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Is that what Frankenstein is?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm pulling Kristin off track. She's the expert and I'm the asshole.
That could be a new name for the podcast.
Oh my god. The expert and the asshole.
Okay.
Welcome to the expert and the asshole. Expert. What's up?
Okay, so basically, I just want to touch on this really quick. And we're going to talk more about it, but a lot of people think that they have poor shoulder mobility, so they keep working on like their overhead positions, like trying to get their shoulders more mobile and doing all of this stretching and whatever, but they actually end up creating unstable shoulders because if you stretch it, if you stretch something too much, eventually, and you're not working on gaining stability in that position, you've got a problem. So a lot of people think that they have really immobile shoulders when they actually have really immobile thoracic spine.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so they're never going to fix their overhead position because they're not addressing the actual thoracic spine. And this was one thing, the reason I want to bring this up is because we did a live Facebook Live question and answer.
In our Facebook group page.
Yeah, in our Facebook group page. And Jen Thompson was one of the athletes who came in and did this. And she even talked about, so we're talking about a world champion powerlifter.
Elite of the elite.
Elite of the elite. And she talks about the role of working on her thoracic extension. All of you that do bench press know what thoracic extension is because you have to have it to do your arch. Right? So she talks about laying over a football several times a day in her mid back to really work that arch position. So that's thoracic extension. And that's just something that's really overlooked. So you've got to be able to, we spend so much time hunched over at our desks.
Like, trying to extend yourself in any shape or form. Well, and so a lot of people, when they bench, they get a lot of pain in their hips. And I know we got a question on our Facebook group page that we were going to answer last, but I think it fits better in here. They get pain in their hips because of their bench, and they think it's because of their hips. But really, it's likely because they can't get into a proper arch.
Right.
And so they're widening their stance too wide for their hip structure. Like ladies, we have big hips compared to guys, but like we can't go so wide that it's causing pain. What you need to do is you need to bring your feet in towards the bench and towards your head and get yourself to create that arch in your back. And it's going to take a while. You're not going to get it immediately, but it's going to save your hips and it's going to give you a more powerful bench because you're not in pain.
Right.
So if you're having trouble with your bench and you're getting pain in particularly your outside hips or even your upper glutes, because your butt can get sore after benching if you're doing it right. Look at your arch. Look at how much you're arching or lack of an arch.
Right.
And then work on that mobility and stability there.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
And yeah.
Right. We're used to terms.
Yeah. Very good.
Oh.
Well, more so usually in the thoracic spine, everyone's got plenty of stability. I shouldn't say that, but more often than not, it's a mobility issue. So,
so I got like a B.
Yeah, B plus. Yeah. But the things that you're talking about with the bench are very similar with like overhead squat or snatch, right? So we often will get hip pain or low back pain with snatching or overhead squatting. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you can't extend your torso enough backwards. So you've got what ends up happening is the bar goes way over your head behind you. So you're really taxing your shoulders and then you're not maintaining lumbopelvic control because you're lacking the thoracic spine extension to be in that position properly. So this is why it's so important, because if you do that too many times, you're going to blow out a shoulder or you're going to hurt your back. So the other concept that's really important to know is that mobility isn't always the problem. Kind of ties into stability, but this is more than stability. Sometimes your body just doesn't feel safe moving into certain ranges of motion. So you have to teach it through retraining proper motor patterns. So because of previous injury or because of a lack of mobility that's just innate to your body or whatever the reason is, you spend way too much time sitting at a desk hunched over, whatever it is, we lose proper motor patterns through a lot of times through compensation. So something was really tight and you couldn't get into the proper position, so you found a way around it to get in there.
Yeah.
We'll see this a lot with people like well, shoot, we're just going to bring it up now. It's supposed to be at the end, but we'll see. We're going to talk about this more at the end, but just really quick, that you'll see people dumping stability in their lumbopelvic region to gain more motion at the bottom of a squat. And then that comes out as a butt wink. If you guys have ever heard about that, sometimes a butt wink is okay. It's not a big deal. And sometimes it is a big deal. So we're going to talk about that more at the end, but that you'll see, and that's a compensation. So basically, a lot of the times what we think is poor mobility is actually your body trying to protect its weaknesses.
Interesting.
So we're going to talk about the squat some more. We had in our Facebook group page, we put out a call to action, basically asking for your guys' questions about mobility and stability. And we had like 20 questions about hips in the squat. So because that's also something that almost all of us do, that's what we're going to focus in on mostly today. Okay, so the squat. Lots of us have experienced a tightness in the front of our hips while squatting. A lot of us are also aware that our hip flexors are tight due to sitting for excessive amounts of time.
Right.
Okay. So everyone thinks that their tight hip flexors are causing them to have problems squatting to depth. But if there is a tight muscle that's having you, like stopping you from squatting to depth, it's actually probably your adductors, so the inside of your thigh. So
interesting.
So if it's not tight adductors that are causing your issue, but you're still having that tightness in the front of the hip, it's far more likely that you have a motor pattern issue with your squat, and it's causing excessive and improper use of the hip flexors in a squat. So here's the funny thing. Your hip flexors are supposed to be mostly turned off in a squat. They're not really supposed to do anything because the squat is a hip extension exercise, and the hip extensors are the glutes, not the hip flexors.
Interesting.
They're opposing muscles.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's like saying that your bicep and your tricep are working at the same time. We've all done bro work. We all know that you can't do a bicep curl and a tricep push down at the same time. Nope. They can't work at the same time. It's impossible because they're what's called antagonistic muscles.
They work against each other.
They work against each other. They do opposite things. But here's what's interesting is having a tight or overactive muscle group will cause the antagonistic muscle group to be less efficient. So your tight hip flexors are actually shutting down your glutes a little bit, which is terrible for squatting.
That's not what you want.
No. We need to use those. So when this happens, we'll see the torso drop forward in the bottom of the squat. And then your hip flexors are actually trying to take over to extend the knee rather than your hip extensors extending the hip. So the action is occurring at the wrong joint and the wrong muscles are working to a point.
So could that also cause some knee pain?
Absolutely.
Ooh.
Absolutely. So this is going to exacerbate your overactive hip flexor issue. So just to clarify what the hip flexors are, we've got a really deep one kind of that starts in our abs. It's the iliopsoas and goes down to the top of the hip. Okay. Top of the femur. But one of our quad muscles also acts as a hip flexor. Kind of acts as a little bit of a weak hip flexor, but it's the rectus femoris. So it's the only quad muscle that crosses the knee and the hip. So sometimes that gets way too involved in the bottom of a squat.
Interesting.
So
I didn't know that.
You do know that though, because you have a little issue with yours.
I didn't know that.
I mean, no, you intuitively know that. You just didn't like consciously knew it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, so to fix this, you're going to need to work on your hip flexors in some way, probably stretching or tissue smashing, which we're going to get into in a minute. And then you need to activate your glutes. So get those working. So we're going to calm down one muscle group, and then we're going to fire its antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you'll do some slow eccentric squats under load to drill the motor pattern into your nervous system so that your muscles are supposed to be firing, and in what way. We're going to get into that part in a minute. Okay, but do you guys remember the days where you'd walk into a gym? This is really common in CrossFit gyms. This is not a knock on CrossFit gyms. I was one of the people that did this years and years and years and years ago. You'd walk into a CrossFit gym and everyone's like laying around on the floor on a foam roller. You guys remember those days? Have you ever seen that, Mary?
Sometimes it still happens.
Okay, yeah. So we all like thought we were taking our mobility super seriously, even me as a professional. There's been a lot of research that's come out in the last 5 years that tells us, as it turns out, like foam rollers and lacrosse balls don't actually make lasting changes to tissues.
They're just kind of temporary extenders.
Yeah, so these techniques are all what I refer to as tissue smashing. And they include not just foam rolling, but lacrosse ball work, cupping, instrument-assisted soft tissue work. All these techniques do make tissue changes, but they're temporary. So what's happening is we're getting a temporary relaxation of the muscles, because what they actually accomplish is they decrease the tone of the nervous system.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it basically, if you want to think about it, is it's telling your brain to... So muscle tone is referred to as how tight or tense or taut a muscle is.
So it's telling your brain to relax that muscle.
It's telling your brain to relax that muscle, but it's like really temporary. So while they absolutely make changes, what we're learning is that it's no longer appropriate just to roll around on a foam roller and call it a day.
You need more.
You need more.
Okay.
So you still do those things. So those things are still really important because they do cause temporary changes. And then we want to capitalize on those temporary changes to make them more permanent changes.
Oh.
And that's a part that I think has been missing for the last several years. And I think it's probably, I would say, if I had to guess, the last 5 years, there's been lots of really cool research that's come out on this. So here's the part you guys need to do. So you're going to do your tissue smashing, and then you need to do some more muscle activation type stuff after that. So that's when you're going to get really good lasting changes to the tissues. So what you need to do is you teach the nervous system that it is okay for you to move into the new range of motion that you got through your stretching or your foam rolling or whatever it was that you were doing. Okay, so here's an example of what that looks like. After you do your tissue smashing or stretching, you're going to do something called eccentric isometrics. Let's talk about what these terms mean. So eccentric is the lowering portion of a movement, and isometric means holding under tension. So in this case, we'll be holding at the end of that eccentric movement. So I'll break it down for you. If it's the squat, we're talking about eccentric lowering, and then isometric holding at the bottom. Mm-hmm. Same with a bench. So you guys get the idea. So the way that you achieve this is you're going to load up a barbell with
100% of your max.
No.
What?
But a good thing to start with would be about 50% of your 1 rep max would be a good starting point. If it's your first time doing it, go lower. But you can do eccentric isometrics at 50% of your 1 rep max. And then over time, work up to 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. But that's over time, you don't start there because at higher loads, so 80% and up to 90% and 100% is generally where our bad motor patterns start to come out. So
it's like when you try to max and all of a sudden all of your shitty technique that you thought you fixed all of a sudden comes back.
There it is again.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So 50% of your 1 rep max. You're going to, let's say we're doing a back squat. You're going to walk out. You're going to take 2 to 7 seconds to get to the bottom. And then you're going to hold at that end range for 3 to 5 seconds and then come out quickly. So it's similar to tempo work if you've ever done tempo squats or things like that. But at least for the beginning, the load is a little bit lighter so that we're getting like proper motor pattern and your brain is really thinking about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So you're focusing less on the weight and more on the movement.
It is when you do eccentric isometrics for this reason, you never focus on the weight. It's not about the weight. It's about getting the proper motion occurring.
Well, I was just saying, like, instead of what you would normally do when you squat is you think about how much weight is on the bar. This time you need to be actively thinking about, well, what muscles are working? Am I moving in the right position? Am I holding in the right position? And am I using the proper muscles to get out of the position?
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so start with 50% of your 1 rep max. Over time, you can work up to 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. I like using the lower rep or the lower load because I think this is a really good warm up. So you do your stretch and then you do some of this to
get
work
it going,
to get that end range of motion working appropriately. So you're training that in. But absolutely, you can work up to 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. And really, I think that is going to be where that is really useful is then so that when you get to those higher loads toward your 1 rep max, you still have impeccable technique. If you are unable to do these with 50% of your 1 rep max, that's a really good indication that your motor patterns probably need a lot more work than what you're going to get with just this. So for that, I really like doing goblet squats. So take a kettlebell or a dumbbell, hold it up by your chin, do some squats. I think those are excellent for retraining motor patterns, getting muscles
not
firing.
for weight, not for time.
Exactly.
Slow and controlled.
Yep. All the stuff I would do as a warm up.
Yeah.
It's movement prep.
Yes.
Yep. All right. So another one that I really like, and Mary and I made the decision when we wrote this episode was to not give you guys too many specific exercises because this is audio. You don't know really exactly what we're talking about, but there is one I'm going to bring up, and that is one I gave you for your squats was the banded lunge, where you're moving in and out of hip flexion in a banded lunge position, and that's retraining that lumbopelvic stability.
Yeah.
So that's a super good exercise to do.
I'll make sure to link something in the show notes. I'm not sure exactly what right now, if it'll be a video or an article, but I'll link something in the description so you guys can see what this is, because it's kind of confusing to explain if we can't have you here like showing you how to do it. So we'll put up an article or a video.
All right. So we talked about all this other stuff, but we really didn't talk about stretching, which is what
Static
a lot
stretching.
of people, we didn't talk about static stretching, which is what a lot of people think of when they think about mobility. So I think you can stretch before you do this movement pattern work that we've been talking about. But I specifically love static stretching after training.
Yes.
That if I have or had the world's worst mobility. I mean, I have since I was like 3. Like awful. My brother and my dad are the same way. Like we're just super inflexible people.
Fantastic.
Right. So I've had to do a lot of work. Even like 2 years ago, my squat was like parallel at best. So I had to do a lot of work on that. And one of the things that's been really a game changer for me is implementing static stretching after training.
Immediately after training
when my muscles are still warm. That's when you can make some more lasting changes, because everyone that's ever like woken up in the morning is like, I'm going to stretch, so you can't really stretch as well as your muscles aren't warm. They're not ready to stretch. I think you can actually do a little bit more harm that way.
Yes.
So,
because you're trying in the morning, you're less flexible. Now, I'm not saying get up and don't do your yoga routine or whatever, but yoga is a little different because usually it's taking you through movements. But if you get up and try to stretch, you'll find that you can't actually get into the positions that you could at like 4:00 in the afternoon. So you end up forcing yourself in those positions, and that's how you tear something. That's how you get hurt.
Yeah, let's not do that. So the other thing I really like about stretching after training is that it helps with recovery and you're less likely to be sore from training. So like just take 5 minutes and stretch. You could probably even accomplish it in 3 minutes if you were in a hurry, but do some stretching.
Do something.
Yep. But there are times when stretching isn't really the answer.
If this causes you pain.
If it causes you pain, yeah. So a lot of times people will have pain at the tissues surrounding a joint, and that's typically indicative of some tendinitis. So we see this a lot with weightlifters is patellar or quadricep tendinitis, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
They're technically two different things, but we're not going to distinguish the difference. So you might have some tendinitis if you've got some pain right near your kneecap or right above your kneecap. So if you do a static stretch of those quad muscles, it further pulls on that tendon. It can irritate it more. So that's when I'm a really huge fan of doing tissue smashing and then movement work of the quads. So do some muscle activation to the antagonistic group. So you could stretch, you could not stretch, you could do some tissue smashing of the quads, and then
it doesn't put tension on the joint.
Exactly.
It can do the stretching without the stretching.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And as I get older, I'm a master's athlete. As I get older, the easiest way for me to wreck my knees for a day is to do the typical runner quad stretch.
Oh, God.
Which is crazy because I think of all the times I used to do that forever and ever and ever. But yeah, I wrecked my knees. Okay. So
now that we've talked about all that and Kristin has bombarded us with knowledge, now let's take a step back and talk about what specifically you should do, because that's why you're here, right? You're like, oh, mobility. They're going to tell me what to do, and they haven't told me what to do yet.
Right.
So now we're going to give you, I'm the asshole, you're the expert. So now we're going to give you some things that you should be doing pre-training, post-training, things that can help you. Specifically, I'd say for the squat. We didn't really go into anything extra, really.
Right. But all of these principles can be applied to every movement.
Right.
Yep.
So the squat's just kind of the biggest one that we can apply to all of our powerlifters and all of our weightlifters.
It's something that we all understand.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So to develop your mobility plan, and yes, you need a mobility plan. If you are working with a coach, hopefully they have added in a mobility plan for you. But if not, do it on your own. Don't wait for your coach to do it.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't completely understand what you need in that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So your mobility work needs to take into account a few things. The first thing it needs to take into account is what is your training for today? And then when you look at that, your warm-up should consider, okay, I'm doing X, Y, and Z movements. So I'm going to do a stretch and maybe some eccentric isometrics for that. And then post-training, you need to factor in what you did. So each day, your mobility plan revolves around what you're going to do and what you did.
Right.
So for example, if you have squats programmed, your warm-ups should include something that seeks to gain a better bottom position. You could stretch your adductors, activate your glutes, and then post-training, you should focus on recovery of those muscles used. So you could do static stretching or some sort of PNF stretching of the quads, hips, glutes, and calves. 5 minutes.
Perfect.
And then the other thing that you need to take into account with your mobility plan is what are your specific needs? Where is your mobility lacking?
Right.
If you don't know where your mobility is lacking, you probably have an idea, but if you really don't know, there's a few resources, and we'll try to link these in the show notes that you can go to. But get something called a functional movement screen. I'm a huge fan of that. Anyone from physical therapists to chiropractors to trainers, anyone that works with people in this group can be trained to do functional movement screens. And there's a website where you can go and find people that are trained in this. And I think there's even a handful of people that are doing like online functional movement screens now. And so they'll
Wow.
be able to look at you move like over Skype or whatever and say, these are your issues. So if you don't know, find someone that can help you. But so if you have poor ankle mobility or poor hip mobility or bad thoracic spine mobility, make sure that you're doing something every day, whether it be before training or after training. I prefer this stuff to be around training for the reason that you're warm and it's movement prep and all that. So, focus on what your specific needs are. So spend 20 to 30 minutes before training.
Do you think that's excessive?
No, I don't at all.
Really?
I don't at all. Yeah.
I think that's excessive. I think if I spent 20 minutes before training, I would be done. I would just hate everything about training. But would 10 minutes be okay depending on your needs?
Depending on your needs.
I take like 3 minutes.
I know, and I worry. I really worry about it.
I'm fine.
You're fine now because you're 25. But when you get to my age and everything starts falling apart because you didn't do proper mobility in the beginning, you might have problems.
I'm okay.
She's fine. She doesn't need it. She's good. Okay. So no, really, I think if you're asking my professional recommendation, spend 20 to 30 minutes. Can you get away with 10 minutes? Well, 10 minutes is better than 0 minutes.
I'll take that.
Okay.
I'll do that. 1 minute was better than 0 minutes.
So in the beginning, get warmed up and prep your body to move efficiently. So I'm not saying spend 20 to 30 minutes stretching. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying do a couple stretches, do a couple muscle activation techniques like what we talked about that are specific to what you're going to be doing that day, and then move on. I like to spend about 2 to 3 exercises for each area. So for me on snatch days, I'm generally doing like some shoulder and thoracic spine drills. So those might be stability drills, or they might be like movement prep drills. Mm-hmm. And they will include an element of stretching because I'm tight. But also I've got to work on my hips before I move.
Right.
So I've got to stretch my hip flexors. I need to do glute activation, and I need to do some sort of movement prep in the squat. So, and then afterwards, after I train, I spend 5 minutes and pick 3 to 6 exercises to do.
Yeah.
On each side. Pretty simple. That's it. So the really cool thing, Mary and I are actually working on a training journal for you guys right now. And one of the components of that training journal is a dedicated spot each day to write in the journal what your mobility and recovery needs are for your next session, which I love.
I love that because then you actually have a way to keep track of, well, I was in pain this day, I wonder why. And you're like, well, I didn't do my mobility, or I didn't prep properly, or whatever. So it gives you data to look back and think about and actually start analyzing your training instead of just going to the gym and doing things and leaving.
Right.
You get the opportunity to be like, okay, well, if I had to rate this on 1 to 5, it was probably a 3 for today. And if I really had tried harder, I could have done better at my follow-up stretching or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's a good way just to record your thoughts and feels and data.
The other thing too is I think if you randomly one day are like, it seemed like my ankle was really tight and or my calf was tight and I couldn't quite get to the bottom of a squat without my heel coming up. If you write that down, you're like, okay, I'm going to spend some time on it. And if you see that pop up and then it's like happening over and over and over again, you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Maybe I need to see a professional or take a bigger look at this. So I think it's a good way to look back at things too. Okay. So one thing, we've talked about how to gain better mobility and get in better positions. And one thing, and if you work at this stuff every day, or every day you train at least, you will have increases to your mobility. You will get to a better end range of motion. You've got to get stronger in that end range of motion.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about squats, if you were really good at gaining mobility and movement, and you could say barely squat to parallel, and now you can squat ass to grass, woo, that's a lot of inches that you've got to make up for. So you're going to have to probably back off the weight in your squats a little bit and start, building your way back up because you've got so much more mobility. But once you get there, once you're able to hit your old numbers, which it won't take a long time, but you'll get there. then you've got to build the strength there. So
Yeah.
make sure you use it is what I'm saying. You gain that mobility. Make sure you're using it.
Yes, take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. So basically, to recap your mobility plan is that it needs to be in line with your training. You must work on stretching and activating the muscles that you're going to be using for training. And then afterwards, stretch the muscles you used. Really simple. Pick a couple trouble areas each day and work on them.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
It is.
Don't forget that there are other limiting factors in the squat. So what other limiting factors, if you could think of another main one,
Yeah.
what do you think is another limiting factor besides your hips?
Yeah, I just kind of touched on it. We talked so much about hips because we had so many questions about hips. And
Yes.
We all know all about tight hips. Don't forget that ankles can be a big limiting factor in the bottom of a squat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially if you're an Olympic lifter and you're doing snatches and cleans and you're, really, really low in the squat, ankles can be a really big issue.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't think about that. A lot of people have really, really tight calves. It's usually a tight calf that's preventing you from getting in there, and then some weakness in the front of the shin. So make sure you're doing some stretches for your ankles, doing some, I really like stretches under load with ankles. So as you stand, push your knee over your toe as you're standing, move into that position under load, just your body weight's enough. That's going to help you gain more mobility of your ankles. And then the one big thing in the squat that we did not even talk about was the dreaded butt wink.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So people talk about this all the time. A butt wink is if you look at someone from the side as they squat and they squat down, and once they get to the bottom, if you see their pelvis tuck underneath them, that is called a butt wink. Sometimes it is a really big deal, and sometimes it's not that big of a deal if it happens really minimally. So theoretically, what happens in a butt wink is that you are losing control of the lower abdominal muscles to gain some more mobility in the bottom of a squat. And so that poses a problem because you never want to be squatting under load heavy and then lose your abdominal control.
Right.
That's we want everything to be nice and tight at the bottom of the squat. So if you the other thing that happens with that is we tend to get flexion of the lumbar spine in a butt wink. So the pelvis tips under, and then the lumbar spine you'll see kind of poke out. That part is problematic. That part can be a mechanism of injury for a lumbar disc herniation, but it's not always a bad thing. So some people have a really minor butt wink and it's like no big deal. I'm talking about like the gross, like you look at them and you see this gross,
oh my God.
Like it's when it's really obvious,
right?
That's really problematic. And that is usually caused by a few things, but one is motor control of the lumbar spine or the lumbopelvic region in a squat. It can also occur because they're trying to stay upright and they don't have the thoracic extension to stay upright, or they don't have the ankle mobility to keep them upright. Yeah.
So it all ties together.
It does. It all ties together. But if you've got a butt wink and it's really bad, and if you're getting back pain, that's a really bad sign. Some people, though, like me, I have what's called a hyperlordosis of my lumbar spine. So if you look at me, I'm like a little sway back. So when I squat, my spine does move, but it generally moves to neutral. That's fine. A neutral spine under load is okay. A flexed spine under load, not okay.
Bad.
So I get a really tiny butt wink in the bottom of my squat, no big deal. But if you start to see my spine curve out the other way,
we are in for trouble.
That's a problem. So anyway, that's the butt wink that everyone always asks about. So a lot of these questions came to us. In fact, almost this whole episode was made
brought to you by Women's in Strength.
Yeah.
Athlete Resource, our Facebook group page. So if you're not a part of that, go join now, because we asked these questions, I think about a couple weeks ago. And we got a really good discussion on there. We got a lot of good questions, and that's what sparked this whole thing. So if you want to have a say in kind of what goes on the podcast, come on there and start having a conversation, because it really helps us see like what you guys need, what you guys want to hear. And it also gives you a way to connect with people who live across the world, who do the same things that you do. You know, it's a great community to be a part of. I love it.
Yeah. And so you can post videos on there. So like if you're concerned about your butt wink, post a video and I'll let you know if it's a problem or not a problem.
Kristin will yell at you personally.
I will not yell. Do I yell? I don't yell.
Yeah, you do. Hips!
I do yell hips to Mary while she's squatting, but that's it. It's the only time I yell. Okay, so there were a couple of questions that came up in that Facebook group page that weren't answered within the context of this episode. So we want to just take a couple moments at the end here to answer some of these questions. So Jennifer asked us, as I age, what are the most effective or important mobility and stability exercises I can do to minimize loss of balance, falls, and independence? What is an efficient daily mobility routine for daily functional activities? I would say that everything that we discussed is what you need to be doing.
Yeah. And keep doing it. I think what becomes a problem is a lot of people stop doing anything.
Stop exercising.
They stop worrying about stability and mobility. But if you keep that up, it's going to help you as you get older. So just don't quit. Just don't stop.
Yeah. So Jennifer, that's your answer. Everything above still applies to you, even in terms of your daily functional activities, because squatting, deadlifting, picking things up from the floor, these are all functional activities. Yep. All right. So then Kamari, I think, I'm currently having issues with hip mobility in my squat. Is there a list of mobility drills I should do? We're going to try to link some of these things in our Facebook group page. So if you're looking for specific drills, come to our Facebook group page and we're going to have some videos, either us doing them, if we can get it filmed in time for you guys, or we'll link to other people that are doing them on YouTube videos and such. But then she wants to know if it's possible to do too much.
Yes.
It is.
Especially with stretching and, like we said, tissue smashing. So you don't want, if you are stretching your muscles, but you are not strengthening your muscles in the new positions they can get into, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're going to be super flexy, but you're not going to be super strongy.
Exactly. Strongy. That's a good word. Yep.
Thanks.
So Kim asks about shoulders. We didn't talk at all about shoulders, and we maybe need to do a whole episode on shoulders. She says her shoulders are a train wreck, and she's getting them squared away, but she's really worried to add in overhead work. So I actually went through this really recently as a patient, so I have firsthand experience with it. But the answer to add in overhead work is to slowly, hopefully you've been doing stability drills for the shoulders. So like ITY exercises, banded would be really good. So hopefully you've been doing all that stuff. So that's hopefully when you say that you're getting them squared away, hopefully that's through some physical therapy or some rehab of some sort. And then you're going to add overhead work back in, is you're going to have to slowly start. So whether you want to be doing standing presses or overhead squats or snatches, you need to start with really controlled movements first. So pressing the bar, overhead squatting the bar.
Take it slow.
And then slowly build up in weight on those movements and only do what you can control. So when I started back, I could only overhead squat 35 kilos, and then that was it. I could no longer maintain stability of my shoulder, and so I only worked up to 35 kilos for a while. And then once I was able to really hold a load over my head, I started adding back in the dynamic things. Right. So jerks and push presses and snatches and that kind of stuff. So go slow, make sure that you have the stability, make sure that you have the stability under load, then you can add in the dynamic things. And if something hurts, stop doing it. So Karen talks about, she asked us, what almost everyone asked us about was tight hip flexors and hamstrings, but she specifically says she sits a lot during the day, and how can she counteract that? And my answer to you, Karen, is move those muscles through their end ranges of motion regularly. Make sure you're squatting, make sure you're doing all of these movements. Movement is therapeutic. So you just have to do more mobility and stability work to counteract that. But do everything that we talked about and then some.
Yeah. I think that's it. Let us know in the comments on our Instagram posts what you thought of this episode. If you were confused, if we should clear it up. I think Kristin did a good job. I think you did a good job. Obviously, it's very technical, but everything you do as an athlete becomes technical. So you have to, we have to educate ourselves, and that's this particular episode. If you haven't already, go check out our Facebook group page. It's just a group of women doing great things together, having great conversations. It's a community. It's all about being strong and brave and empowered by iron. We'd love to have you a part of that community.
It's called Women in Strength Athlete Resource.
Yes. If you type that into Facebook, you should find us. No problem. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and leave us a review if you're feeling super lovey-dovey. That helps the podcast a lot. It allows people to view it more. So if you think that this is a good resource for other women's strength athletes, just hit it. Give us a 5-star rating. And if you're feeling, like I said, super lovey-dovey, write some words for us.
That's it. But if you have specific questions about this episode and exercises and drills and are you doing this right or doing that right, post it up in our Facebook group page. That's what it's there for. I will help you guys out as best I can.
Kristin will help you, and she's the expert, and I'm the asshole. And we're signing off till next week. See you next week, guys. Bye.
Bye.